Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give it another minute or so, but looks like we've got some attendees already here, so that's great. Thank you for joining us a little bit early and being ready to go. And actually, it's just now 10 o'clock, so just in the interest of being respectful of everybody's time, we'll probably have some more people join us as we go along, but I want to thank you again for joining us. If those who don't know me, although you all should, this is Shasta Gaughan. I am the environmental director for the Paula Band of Mission Indians and also the co-organizer of the Tribal Climate Health Project, which is Paula's grant-funded project to develop strategies for health adaptation to climate change impacts. And as a part of that work, one of the things that we are including in our adaptation and vulnerability planning is assessments of our mental and emotional wellness in times of crisis. That includes the climate crisis, but it also includes things that are happening that are tangential or not directly related to climate, like the current coronavirus pandemic. We can learn a lot from our disaster response to the pandemic and apply those lessons to our climate work. So in that spirit, we are welcoming today Dr. Douglas Walker. He is a psychologist and the Chief Programs Director for the Mercy Family Center in New Orleans. And he is going to spend a couple of hours with us today, helping us learn some techniques and do some training on how we can address these crisis moments in the climate change fight and just in our disaster preparedness in general. So Dr. Walker, go right ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Shasta. Good afternoon from just outside New Orleans. I'm a psychologist sitting here in my office. Even though I'm here, we're in a virtual world, so we're not seeing patients, probably not up until July. So I thank you for your time. I want to express the fact that this talk is going to be, yes, long, but extremely casual. So I want any questions throughout to be sent over to Shasta, and she'll interrupt me, and I'll be able to address questions in real time. And then we have two parts. After part one, I'm going to put kind of a bookmark for us to discuss, answer other questions that might be lingering, and for any one of you to stretch your legs along the way. When we get to the end, after part two, we'll again have a time for general discussion. My experience in dealing with mass trauma came by way of Hurricane Katrina about 15 years ago. Prior to that, I was working in hospitals primarily as a psychologist and seeing trauma in a different way, in a very individualized way with children. So working in emergency rooms, chronic care departments, I was faced with the reality that bad things happen to very good people. At that time in my career, it was an individual or a small family experience. After Katrina, it became thousands. I had the opportunity after Katrina to design a large-scale mental health program for the New Orleans area schools, which is still in existence today and funded by the federal government, called Project Fleur-de-Lis. It means flower of light. Along the way, after Katrina, I had the opportunity to spread my wings a little bit and travel and share my experience not only nationwide, but worldwide. I've been extremely fortunate to have trained and lectured this very material in 25 countries. And so I hope that today we'll be able to share experience and for me to come away learning more as well. I believe that this idea of evidence-based practice needs to come in more in line with this actual definition. And so I don't have my slide for this, but know that evidence-based practices, and we'll talk about one today, is combined with three things. The first is best practice. So it's the science behind what you're using. Oftentimes it's linked to control studies, looking at outcomes, kind of the statistics of the intervention. The other two parts are you. And so what I mean by that is a tribal member, a counselor, mental health professional, leader, and maybe most importantly, your knowledge of your community. And that's why I very much enjoy and prefer face-to-face trainings, because we can bring together those three things: best practices, your experience, and then your knowledge of your community. Because what I present to you today means nothing unless we filter it and find a place for it in your own community. And so we hope, Shasta, myself, and our colleague Angie Hacker, we hope to actually have a face-to-face training based on what you see today, maybe in the coming months, who knows. What I have before you, this part one, focuses on COVID-19. And I put it up front because it actually establishes some very basic tenets around mass casualty or mass disaster events. And as a psychologist, I always try to find metaphors to explain where I'm thinking or how I'm thinking about things, or how we can share an idea. And what I've chosen most recently, and I put this toward the front, I've done this talk a handful of times over the past couple months, and I've put this toward the front because I want to offer up the idea that our world now, with layers of chaos. So COVID-19 is certainly one. Climate change is another. The social unrest now worldwide. It's as if we're sitting on a tilt-a-whirl. And so I don't know about you, if you've ever ridden one of these at a local amusement park or a traveling show, but there's a lot of moving parts. But my point with this picture is that although all of us are maybe on this ride, spinning and moving, we're all experiencing the same thing. We begin together, we end together. But where we sit in the car changes how we see in our perspective on things. So we need to remember that although we're kind of all in this together, our perspectives from where we sit by way of how we're brought up, where we live, our lifelong experience, maybe our education, changes how we see our current situation in the world. So I want you to kind of remember this metaphor. We'll return to it, maybe talk and use it as a talking point after part one.
And just real quick, I want to let you know that if you do have comments or questions about anything in the presentation, if you're familiar with GoToWebinar, you probably know this, but just in case, on the the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a column with a set of different areas that you can click, and one of them is a questions box. So any comments or questions you have, please put those into the questions box, and I will read them out. Okay, go on.
All right, thank you, Shasta. So I work for a large medical mission, really, out of St. Louis called Mercy. We have about 45,000 employees across 4 different states, Missouri being kind of the home base. And as we got started in addressing, as a large healthcare system, COVID-19, we began to understand quickly that what was once easy is not anymore. And so the normal is not easy now is a quote from a nurse manager up in Washington, Missouri in April, as they were facing the surge. And what she meant by that was that our SOP, our standard operating procedures, were now much more complex because they had to consider COVID-19. So a broken leg coming into the emergency room was just not a broken leg anymore. It was also the risk of COVID-19, contamination, and so on and so forth. And so I think we would all agree that as we still try to emerge from or find our recovery from COVID-19, that what we know is normal certainly is not easy anymore. Natural disasters are all different. They have what we call different signatures. And we use that purposely because each is so unique. Not so much, well, they're unique not only because how they happen or the devastation that they wreak on communities, but each inside has its own signature because of the community history, how many people are impacted. And so each, not all flooding is the same, not all droughts the same, not all wildfires are the same. And so we have to appreciate these things. It becomes even more complicated when we consider man-made disasters. Those that are maybe even linked with natural disasters. And so we can think of Fukushima, Japan, where there was an earthquake, tsunami, and then the tsunami actually took out the Daiichi nuclear power plant and caused a meltdown. Extremely complex and has implications now measured in decades, where individuals that once lived on the coastline there in Japan will never return to their home because there's still cesium in the soil, and will be because the half-life is around 100 years. And so all of these that you see here on this slide deck are really symptoms of climate change. And that's the switch here. I think, my prior 10 years post-Katrina, I was looking at these really as individual events. But as the tempo, pace, even rhythm of these things increase over time, we know now that they're really symptoms of a larger problem. In Louisiana, we are experiencing higher water levels, less barrier islands, marshes, and the ground is actually sinking. And one tribal community in Louisiana has already relocated because of it. And there are others contemplating what their future is, not only about where they live, but how they make their living, especially around the fishing and seafood industry. So when you think about pandemics in particular, so we're going to focus on COVID-19 as a broad stroke conversation and give you the basic elements in handling any type of crisis. So unlike other types of disasters, pandemics are universal. So we're all experiencing it. In other types of crises, natural or man-made, there's someone who isn't experiencing it and has the resources to come in and help. So in some ways, we don't have the resources outside the disaster area to come in and support us. We're all threatened and all taxed by this. And because the coronavirus can't be seen, it creates an amazing amount of anxiety and fears, which is different than other types of disasters. So I've had the experience of being in California during wildfire season, and I can certainly relate to just the horizon and looking at smoke, or the triggers that come with seeing aircraft filled with water and fire equipment flying overhead. So these are all things that you can see, whereas COVID is unseen. This slide I use in my keynote addresses to really talk about the extremes of what we call stress into trauma. And again, like that tilt-a-whirl, depending on where you are and what your history is, where you are with your family or community, it's going to vary, and not only vary by person, but by time and place. So certainly there are things in life that are stressful, and we can go to the extreme where certainly things are traumatic. I'd like you to ask the question of where COVID-19 or your experience falls on that. And maybe more importantly, has it changed? Has it changed since the beginning? Has it increased to more kind of the red end of this continuum? Is it more traumatic, or toward the other end, the yellow end, is it just stressful right now, or was it just stressful? So I want to think of this continuum from stress to trauma as a way to, in some ways, measure where everybody is in regards to how they relate to COVID-19. We are in uncharted territory. Full worldwide pandemics are rare, and it's been quite a while, probably 100 years, and since we've experienced something like this. Finding a compass to navigate can be difficult, and in taking notes about this, either in real time, writing on a notepad, or in your head, I want to give some kind of basic guidance on this, given my experience in helping other communities recover from disasters. The first and foremost is accepting good for great. And what I mean by that is that all of you on this call are professionals, either in your own right, in what you do for a living, but experts in leading a family, or experts as being a good spouse. We all are likely perfectionistic in some way. And so I want you to give yourself permission to accept good for great, and that each day will come where you have an opportunity to do better, but cut yourself some slack. How do we achieve calm in such a chaotic world right now? I rely and recommend that people rely a lot on routine. And so routine could be daily routine, but also routines with regards to community. What is possible, even in this world of COVID-19, in creating some routine and community where we can predict things, which in turn equals a sense of control and finally calm. So think of a routine and scheduling. I feel sorry for all this individuals, kids in particular, who are in school, where routine was measured in, by classes, by hours, by the bell. Without that routine, the sense of calm is hard to achieve. As a leader, in whatever role that you have, you want to be able to provide regular and easy consumable information. The day of long paragraphs or even tip sheets, long pages of bullet points are gone. People don't have the bandwidth with all that's going on to pay attention and read. The two kind of rules that I follow right now is, if you can't consume or read something in the amount of time it takes to have a cup of coffee, then you probably shouldn't be passing it out. Is to reduce it, condense it. And I think to stand out and to really speak to connectedness, I'm highly recommending that communities translate any tips or information that they have around coping and recovery into short videos. It's not hard to do. The technology we have now on our cell phones is actually pretty amazing. And so very personable messaging for individuals, maybe around 2 minutes long, is a way to provide, again, very easily consumable information. And people need to know when the next communication will be as well. And so, again, that kind of relies on that idea of routine and predictability. Certainly provide culturally appropriate resources. And again, it gets back to that definition I provided around evidence-based practice, is to be able to take what's best out there and filter it with your own experience and what's appropriate for your communities. So that could be in education, mental wellness, maybe even economic advice. And finally, when appropriate, measure and monitor well-being. This is a question that's come up in many of the webinars that I've given over the past several months. I do a lot of work with international schools, and many wanted to measure how are people doing? And so I think there's a time for that. And I think it has to be done at a point in time where people feel that things are getting better, in more control. So what to expect in a crisis like this? Well, we're certainly not through this yet. And like the tilt-a-whirl, we're all looking at things from a different place. Over the next few months, uncertainty will continue. Fear, in some ways, it'll be even more complex because we'll be what we call asynchronous. There'll be places in the US that are hotspots, some are not. Some were open, not open. And so where before, over the last couple of months, we've kind of been in lockstep, in locking down and then coming into our phases, right? Phase 1, phase 2. So communication, coping, and decision-making is going to be difficult. But how people behave will likely change as well. And so if people come into your office, into your home, and they're not themselves, it's likely fear or uncertainty or even fatigue that's driving that behavior. So cut them some slack. These are really expected reactions to a very extraordinary situation. And we think professionally that fear and uncertainty will fade into more things around lack of closure and even guilt. Not so much about guilt, say with survival. I mean, yes, that grief and loss will be there with deaths, with people with permanent disabilities. But the economics right now are clear and present, and there are a lot of companies, big and small, who have guilt over having to let go employees en masse. And so guilt will come from a lot of different places. What to expect yourself in a crisis like this? Again, establish order. If you're a leader in any capacity, establishing your own sense of calm and being a mirror to other people is extremely important. You want to reinforce confidence in others. And I'll come back to this in a little while, but those that gather around you, they're likely chosen because of their expertise. But when unexpected things happen like this, we become imposters, or we think we're imposters, that we're not somehow worthy of meeting the demand. And so looking around at your coworkers, your colleagues, even friends and family is to build them up and let them know that they can get through this. We all are in uncharted waters, and when in doubt, certainly seek peer support or advice.
And I want to chime in here for a second just to say that, again, we want this to be a conversation. So, as Dr. Walker is going along here, if there's anything that resonates with you that you want to share and put in that question box, I'm here reading it. And I don't think everybody can see your question. I think only Doug and I can. But if there's anything that occurs to you, some coping technique that you're using or that you've suggested to others that you want to list for us, or even some of those feelings you're having, the idea of guilt. I admit I feel some guilt because I don't have a family at home. I don't have a spouse, and I feel guilty about having a whole house to myself where I get to leave and it's just me and my cats, and I'm not having to make some of the same sacrifices that other people are having with staying in their little houses and stuff. And so I feel like I've got nothing to complain about. So I feel guilty about feeling any stress, but that's not okay. I'm allowed to feel stress. So, again, if anybody wants to share any of those feelings, please go ahead.
Yeah, please do. This is a time for this. Again, we've got a good amount of time to be able to share and kind of unravel some of these very complex feelings, especially around the ones that guilt is just not guilt. For instance, it's bound up with other types of other feelings driving it. So what you have here in front of you is worth memorizing. These are 5 elements that make up evidence-based practices currently in place that come in after large-scale disasters. So after Hurricane Katrina, a group of individuals, many psychologists, some sociologists, social work, other types of scientists, asked the question, in cases of mass trauma like Katrina, what are the elements that are most important in long-term recovery? And they published, Hopfall was the main author, and if any of you are interested, I can send through Shasta the actual document. They came up with these 5 elements as being core to recovery. And I'm going to talk about them in part 1 of our discussion today in relation to COVID-19. But in part 2, you're going to see them actually operationalized in real skills. And so we can think about this idea of safety, providing calm, connectedness, self and community efficacy, and finally instilling hope in others as the 5 core elements that make up long-term recovery from man-made or natural disasters. So communication. I put this up first and I bundled together safety and calming because everything that you communicate to your peers, coworkers, maybe people that report up to you, should pass through the filter of being or expressing both this idea of safety and calm. Those are the filters that actually support recovery and support mental health and well-being. So when people communicate, if it doesn't exude or express both safety and calming, you should rewrite it. Let's go back to safety and talk in more general terms, the rationale around all 5, but starting with safety. Again, clear, concise, accurate, and timely communication creates a sense of control and safety in others. So in real time, if I was evacuating, say, from a hurricane, or maybe some of you may be evacuating from a wildfire, knowing where things are, what things are happening, does create, for the most part, a sense of control and safety because you know what you're dealing with. It may not be good news, but at least you know what's happening. And so we know that in young children, and I don't think adults are much different, if it's not spoken, our imagination can run crazy, can run wild. And so if it's not spoken, people can make up some pretty unhealthy ideas about the situation. So accurate, timely communication, a sense of control, creates a sense of control and safety in others. Specific messaging. How has the outbreak affected your sense of safety? You may be asking this to people you work with. What helps or could help? Statements like we're committed to our community's health and well-being, although obvious, it's important to communicate. And here's what we're doing to keep people safe. So here in this clinic, we are in daily conversations about reopening it up to patient care again. And that's a very tedious, although very important process. And so we are creating checklists based on the CDC, based on our own healthcare recommendations for Mercy, and the state of, in this case, Louisiana, a program called Open Safely. And so we're combining all those things with a very detailed checklist of how and what we're doing to keep people safe, not only coworkers like myself, but the patients that will return to our clinic. And then giving your best understanding about timelines, advising if anything changes, because it's not a straight path. Things do get in the way. And so explaining the decisions, why things are not happening, are as important as why they are happening. So instilling a sense of calm also comes with how you communicate. So how you go, other people will go. So we are mirrors to other people. Certainly if you have children or if you have pets, you realize that if you're not in a good state, they respond to that. And so others around you will pick up on it. And yes, being a good role model is important. Helping yourself get through these difficult times, these adverse times is important. I'm not saying that all of you need to be a rock, to be perfect, and I'll put that in quotes, to everybody with regards to being strong. But instilling it in others, expressing it as best you can is important because you have to be able to lead. And questioning, asking people, connecting with others is important. So the messaging around calming could be something like, how are you sleeping? That's probably one of the most fragile pieces to our human existence is sleep. But it's also the easiest to talk about. And so maybe breaking the conversation up into something different and asking coworkers how they're connecting with others, maybe video platforms, how they're sleeping, how are they eating, are they getting out and being able to exercise are all important questions. What do you need?
Yeah. Sorry. Hey, let us know, you guys. I'm pushing you to participate. Let us know how you're sleeping. Throw that in the question box. Sleeping like a baby, sleeping too much, not sleeping enough, having crazy dreams. Last night I dreamed that Adam Driver wanted to be my boyfriend. You know, Adam Driver, Kylo Ren from the Star Wars series, which were terrible movies, but I really love Adam Driver. But by the end of the dream, I found out he only wanted to be my boyfriend because he thought I could get him free stuff at the Paula Casino. So that was a stress dream.
Looks like a comment has come up. I don't know if I can grab it.
Yeah, it's that's Melody. She says she's not sleeping very well, but that's normal for her. Well, that's no good, Melody. I'll call you and start singing you lullabies at night.
Yeah, to share my dream experience, I've can everyone still see my screen?
I see it.
Okay, good. Okay, because I see Shasta and I see other things. So for me, what's happened with COVID, I guess we have a pre-COVID life and a post-COVID life or during. I did a lot of traveling, and although I enjoyed it, I'm finding now that just being home and having a regular routine is so comforting. But my dreams have changed. Whereas before I would have dreams that were really more creative, to be honest, the pieces and parts, and even things I would have never thought I've dreamt of, where now my dreams are very literal. So I'm dreaming about people, places, things that are very close to me. So family, my surrounding neighborhoods. So I'm not dreaming about things so far away, either in my imagination or even physical space. So COVID dreams is a thing. So if you actually search it on the internet, people are talking about how this is changing our experience. And another thought about sleep. You know, sleep is again such a fragile thing. I find that one of the reasons for this is if you really think about it, it's the only time, can be the only time that we're alone with our thoughts. Whether you share your sleeping space with somebody else or not, you are there left to go to sleep on your own. And that can be a very, very scary time. Some people use diversion, you know, music or TV to help with that. But I know in my experience, either individually or working with patients, that things like anxiety and depression creep in, and you're just praying to go to sleep. It's the question I always ask: is it your body keeping you up? So maybe it's too much caffeine, or you're on the internet, or is it your brain, the thoughts?
We have another comment, which actually encompasses both of those from Cindy. She says she's not sleeping at all, but I think it's stress from everything, my leg, work, and the state of the world. And the leg thing, I can clarify. Poor Cindy had I think it's a broken leg, right, Cindy? So yeah, that's physical and mental stress going on there, keeping you up.
Yeah. So a separate talk, but sleep. There's a field called sleep hygiene. If any of you want a little more advice there's a great organization that I reference all the time called sleepfoundation.org. Sleepfoundation.org, and they're not selling anything. They're just in the business of helping people sleep. So going there might be helpful if you're struggling with sleep. Again, back to the messaging for Calm, allowing community members time and space to share their experience. So hopefully we're doing some of that today. Creating space for more focused self-conversation. What I mean by that is getting people together in small groups, and even groups that are either mixed, people that normally wouldn't get together, or those maybe with a common task or common title. All right. This is the one, connectedness, that we've been denied. Normally after a disaster, I would rely heavily on connectedness. A good example of this comes from Fort McMurray up in Alberta, Canada. They were faced a handful of years ago, I think 3, maybe 4, with the largest wildfire in Canadian history that came through Fort McMurray. In response to that, we created, was it weekly? No, bi-weekly dinners for community members to come together to not only reestablish a sense of community, but to also share information. So not only formally, and what I mean by that is to speak to what's happening in Fort McMurray, or talking about sleep, because sleep can be hard to come by if you think another fire is gonna come your way. So I would rely normally a lot on this idea of connectedness, and I'm denied that, and a lot of people as well. We live in this Zoom existence where there can be really a fatigue even in connecting with each other through video platforms. So the rationale is not very difficult around connectedness, is that being together satisfies a basic human need. And so I'm hoping that we can get back to that someday, but COVID is cruel. I mean, the signature that comes with this pandemic doesn't allow us to be social animals. And knowing how close communities can be, this takes away a lot of being or connectedness, certainly. The United Homa Nation is a tribal community that I work with closely down here in Louisiana, and I've been part of their nightly chats. And so they have a Zoom call every night. Anyone can pop in and say hello, and it's just one way that they're coping with the inability to be close with each other. Messaging, what's the impact? How do you, or are you connecting with each other? How has COVID-19 impacted your relationships? And messaging, like, certainly we'll make this, we'll make it through, we'll survive this. Encouraging people to always stay connected and find even creative ways, unique ways to stay connected would be important. Are there any of you out there that have found other ways to connect with each other other than kind of video or social media? Is there another unique way that we can learn from? Message in a bottle? No.
You know, I haven't done this, but I've considered it, and that is to actually write a real letter or send it to someone. I don't know about the rest of you, but I still get that sense of anticipation when I go out to my mailbox in the hope that there'll be something other than junk mail or bills, and it's so exciting when you get something new. And my dad, who's old school, he's 78, he every now and then will send me articles that he's pulled out of a magazine, and he'll say, I know you already know this because you're the smartest person on earth, but I thought I'd send it to you anyway. And I just get excited because, letters from your dad.
Right.
But we got a couple comments here. Cindy says she likes to call people, and would also enjoy the getting things in the mail. And Melody says nobody wants to talk to her unless she's busy. I don't know if that's just like Murphy's Law, like the moment that you sit down to relax, all of a sudden that's when people start to ring your phone off the hook, or suddenly they need you. That happens to me sometimes. My phone rings all at once, and I'm like, you know what? I'm in the middle of a webinar. I can't talk to you right now.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah,
good.
I think
Alternative.
Yeah, what's the alternative? And so I have a special number for patients, and I don't know if it's something in the air. I'm always available for them, but they always seem to be in need of just a little nudge of support when I'm literally like waist high in something. So whether it's dirt or leaves or a chainsaw or something, it just is. Getting back to Shasta, you're around sending notes. I wrote a congratulations note to my nephew, who's one of the famous class of 2020, not being able to graduate like they expected.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm writing it, I'm struggling with like cursive, like it's like am I in third grade? Like because I don't write enough, and that's a problem. Now, in the same generation as your father, Shasta, my mother-in-law, for instance, her impeccable, like Catholic school impeccable, right? And so when she writes, it's just artwork. I'm like, wow. But if it goes much longer, I may like doing block letters in like crayon with an infantile kind of grip. So I think I need to write more letters.
Well, and we have another comment. Irene, she says she's been writing letters to her 8-year-old granddaughter, and I think that's great. I mean, it's not going to be that useful for the need for instant communication, but what a nice thing to renew that not in person, that written communication that I think is really important. And then, like Doug points out, to be able to keep our handwriting skills from atrophying.
Right. But it's personal, so everyone's, I think, in agreement in the comments and conversation that what we're trying to do is recapture that individuality, but that person. So signature, people's handwriting. You look at someone's handwriting. Oh, that's Mama's. That's Mama's handwriting. And she took the time to write this. And so those are treasures that can be kept for forever. And so hopefully the grandchildren out there are collecting those letters and will hold on to them.
Oh, and Melody also mentions journaling, which I can't believe I just said journaling. And when did journal become a verb? But writing in a journal, I think that's communication with yourself is what that is. And you can go back and look at that later and get a handle on how you were feeling, and maybe that helps you in the future.
Yep, absolutely. So let's move on for time's sake and talk about this idea of efficacy. So self and community efficacy really speaks to the confidence that you will and have what it takes to recover. And so it becomes a little more abstract, where establishing safety, calm, connectedness is a little more tangible. Efficacy relies on history. And so I think everyone on this call has gone through, either in your own family or community, trials, challenges, measured in decades. But tapping into that is a way to really reestablish this idea that you have what it takes to get through this. Building upon that that resilience is important. So when I think of efficacy, I think the converse is around confidence or lack of. And so do you have any change in your confidence? Do you have what you need to do your job, to fulfill your role as part of the family or part of where you work? statements like 1 hour, one at a time, or the one I like to focus on mostly is you're not an imposter. I think Shasta and I have talked about this before, that, we're often met with situations in our life that really test us to the core around who we are as a person and who we are maybe professionally or in our relationships with other people. And I speak of all of us putting on under our clothes, a t-shirt that has imposter on the back. And I think a little bit of humility is good, but I don't want any one of you to think that you're not capable of getting through this. You were chosen as part of your company, as part of your leadership role, or even by a higher power for the role that you play in your family, to do your best, and you are competent. And so I want people to remember that we can't always be 100% confident in what we do. We have to take chances, but you're not an imposter. Check in with community members regularly, share optimism, and of course humor is extremely important. So I highly recommend jokes, tasteful hopefully. I don't think there's too many COVID-19 jokes out there yet, but there may be a time where we're able to find the space to do that. But short of that, my wife always reads the comics to me in the morning. Well, she picks the good ones, and so it's always good to find a chuckle wherever you can find it. Finally, hope, even more abstract. We find hope in believing that things will be better, that there'll be a time where we can look back in our rearview mirror and realize how important things are to us, maybe family, friends, lifestyle. We can begin to appreciate, and maybe along with hope becomes a sense of real gratitude over what we have in our own lives. So around hope, how is this experience in creating deeper connections? What we are living is a life-changing experience, and some of you out there, including myself, I'll tag in here, maybe questioning our sense of purpose. It may challenge our personal perspectives on the world. And so you may find those around you questioning even higher powers or their purpose in life. Is this the job that I really wanted, or that I meant to work in, or is this the relationship that I need to be in right now? So questioning lots of things linked with this idea of achieving hope may happen for you and those around you. I want to speak a little bit to this idea of compassion fatigue. It's a term that was born, as I remember, I think out of the Vietnam or Korean War, when they started doing studies on the impact of caring for the wounded in combat near the front line. And so as medical care got better, they were able to send people into the field and do better work on the lines. And now it's been more applied to those of us that do trauma work, in particular my expertise in doing individual therapy for trauma, psychological trauma in particular. And compassion fatigue has been defined as the weariness that comes from caring. But I believe that compassion fatigue follows any one of us who care for other people. And it may be not, a medical role like a nurse or a doctor or even a psychologist, but caring for others could be in education or as a leader or as a head of a family. But there's a weariness that comes from caring, and the balance that I find in that is that if you care too much, you can be injured. You can become fatigued. If you don't care enough, you're not doing your job. So how do you find that middle ground? And I just want to speak to that a little bit, just musings and just remind you that there are some real symptoms that come with compassion fatigue. It can be physical complaints. You can experience things like PTSD where there's kind of triggers. You can feel inadequate, low self-esteem. You can develop very intense and negative relationships, maybe with the people that you care for or work with. And finally, I love this last one on top, frustration and irritability, just banging your head against the wall. These all can be signs that your caring profession is becoming, say, not unhealthy for you, but there's a need to find some type of new relationship with it. I always love to learn, and I always love to tell people, and I'll tell you this on this call, is that if I come back to you in 2 or 3 years and give the same talk, please run as fast as you can, because it means that I've learned absolutely nothing since I've last seen you. Up until really a couple months ago, I gave this whole section using this metaphor, if you wanted, around work-life balance. I mean, there's even, you can see here an icon for it that I pulled from the internet. It was brought to my attention that it's maybe impossible ever to find a true work-life balance. What I mean by that is the moment you find it, it's set on tilt again. So it becomes extremely exhausting to find that balance, but also this idea of guilt and self-esteem, like I just can't find balance. So this new concept was brought to my attention. I think it cuts us a lot of slack in how we think about balancing our lives. And I'll put balance in quotes because I really want to give up this idea of balance in work life and think about it in more terms of music. And so those of you that enjoy music or maybe are musicians can appreciate the tapestry that comes with all different types. But can we now think, so let's give up for a moment this idea of balance, but consider life in a musical sense. So let's talk about rhythm. Could our lives be more or better defined as being in 4/4 time? So 1, 2, 3, 4, straightforward. It's just happening. It's kind of rhythmic. Or when do we enter those moments in life that are 3/4 time? A waltz, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The difference is quite drastic when you think about it. And so, and maybe in thinking in our lives around rhythm or tone, soft, loud, harsh, and then certainly tempo. So how fast are things for? So I don't know if there's any musicians out there. Is there another term, a musical term that can help define our work life experience? I'd love to hear from you. So it's just a concept or general concepts, again, that I'm working with right now. But I think in thinking of musical terms, it does give us more freedom to cut us some slack, to be nicer to ourselves, to know that this idea of balance might not be possible. So if any of you out there have any comments on maintaining balance, and if any of you have achieved it for long term, please share with us how you do that. So moving on to self-care, there are lectures, and I've created them. I've kind of graduated from talking about what I think is self-care 101, like the basics, because I don't think anymore that knowing what to do is the challenge around self-care. So we talked about sleep earlier in this discussion. We also know to eat the right thing, not to eat too much, not to eat too little. Coping with drugs or alcohol is not good. Exercise is good. Being with other people is a good thing. So self-care, I don't think, is the challenge, especially around knowledge, but finding the time is. And so my marching orders for you today is to set aside time to do those things. I'm not going to talk down to you or feel as though I have to remind you of what to do. It's carving the time out to do it. And so setting your clock to go outside. So not only to take lunch, but to set your clock and walk around the building once might be just enough time to reset your blood pressure or your heart rate or your attitude. So again, making the time. And then what's important to me, rather than just talking about self-care, which I think you guys have, you understand it, is around peer-to-peer support, which really hasn't been capitalized much, I think. So who do you go to? Who do you lean on for support? How can we better support each other? And so we put forth different ideas on how to do this. And it could be in a formal program of peer-on-peer support. I think later in this part 2, I will show you a specific program that supports peer-on-peer. But I want to kind of conclude this section to remind all of you that if you were to memorize 5 kind of global concepts, this idea of safety, calm, connectedness, self and community efficacy, and hope are extremely important. The first 2, safety and calm, you always want to consider in any type of communication that you have. If you're not expressing or able to support or create a sense of safety or calm in the sentences that you write or the sentences that you speak, then you may want to reassess the message itself. So these 5 things are basic elements. In part 2, I'm going to be able to operationalize, actually talk about specific interventions that are very globally accepted and specific skill sets that support each one of these. So grit, this idea of grit is important. And so we talk about resiliency. Do people have what it takes? And so grit can be hard to find. People debate all the time, is it something you're born with? Can you learn it? Or is it a combination of both? So this grit is, although they are available, it's hard to come by. It's actually locked. And if you were lucky enough, you can actually find this grit in East London. It's actually at the Olympic Park in London. But where do we find grit in our everyday lives? We don't have to travel to London. But I think that with uncertainty in COVID-19, grit comes by doing the best with what you have. You're not going to wave a magic wand and create a completely new skill set or understanding, even by reading a lot. Being educated will take you part of the way, but I think uncertainty comes by being able to exist in a chaotic context. The ground beneath you will not always be solid. You have to accept the fact that COVID-19 and this idea of well-being is both a learning experience and a leadership challenge. It's changing every day, and so being flexible and expecting not perfection is important. It requires us to make sense of and respond to ever-changing environment. We want to build our capacity to be center and present, but always to be able to reassess what's going on. So knowing, just like that tilt-a-whirl example, the metaphor I started with, that we're all seeing this from a different place. So sitting in that car there allows us to share the experience, certainly, but our perspectives are different. And as the ride continues fast or slow, with a storm above us, it's going to be different over the days, weeks, or even months, or even years to come. And so when this ride does stop, eventually, hopefully it will, when we get off, it will be a shared experience, but we'll all talk about it in different ways. So we are at the end of our part 1. We're just at an hour. And so I want to be able to take a break for discussion for any of you to stretch your legs or do anything that you have to do as far as maintenance for the next, say, 3 to 4 minutes. Please do come back. But is there anyone out there that wants to expand on anything that we've talked about in part 1? Please do, because we have 3 or 4 minutes.
And meanwhile, I'm going to stretch. I know that a lot of you know Nikki Cooley at ITEP, and at these breaks, she likes to lead everybody in a group stretch. So I'm not standing up, but I'm stretching my arms. So you just want to do that yourself. I've had like this sinus headache for a week now, and stretching kind of helps a little bit. So if you're following along, I'm not seeing you, but it never is a bad thing to get that blood running a little bit. Up towards those ears.
I like the comment, I need a bachelor degree to get on a webinar.
Well, that's Lisa out in Campo, and sometimes the internet out there is not cooperative.
Right.
Oh yeah, and George is commiserating with me on the sinus headache. Yeah, I've been ibuprofen and antihistamines, trying to do a 1-2 punch to keep it in the background. But yeah, I think it's just the weather or something that's putting on the pressure.
Yeah, it's always what's in bloom, right?
Yeah, and I don't normally have allergies, but maybe I do, and this is how they manifest themselves, is through these sinus issues. But while we're just kind of questioning or stretching and talking a little bit, for my colleagues who are local, maybe we could consider having some sort of a weekly or monthly check-in with one another. And it doesn't have to be long, and it doesn't have to be super formal. Even if we did something like creating a Slack channel. I don't know if you guys all know what Slack is, but it's a chat system that people can log on to, where you're able to create topics and send messages to people both within and between organizations. Or we could set up a private Facebook group where we can write down, this is what I had to deal with at work today, or share a funny story, or I can send you pictures of Bertram, my new kitten.
He's cute.
He's extremely cute. And if you're my friend on Facebook, you've already seen pictures of Bertram. But I think we all need those things, and to give ourselves a break, let ourselves be human, and have a safe space where we can talk to one another honestly, because we can't always show that to the community members that we're working with. And she may not be at her computer right now, but I'm going to call out my friend Michelle Nelson, who works at the health clinic in Rincon. And I would imagine that Michelle is dealing with a lot of this with the community, who are unable to come in for regular checkups without all of these, masking and sanitizing and hand washing. And that's got to be really, really hard. You're trying to put up this front, not a front, but you want to show people the same things that Doug's been talking about, the calmness and the sense of control and the hope and the safety. And yet, who's doing that for you? So if you guys think that's a good idea, Lisa said it was a good idea before it looks like she got kicked off again. If you're interested in that, you can put that in the comment box, or we can talk about doing it offline. Oh, and Melody cracking me up. We decided to see if we could stand straight against the wall and touch our toes. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
But we did get a good laugh. Melody, I'm assuming you're talking about both you and George, because you're probably in the same office like usual. Yeah, George says yes. I can't touch my toes either. That's like two things I want in my life. I want to be able to touch my toes, and I want to be able to do one pull-up. One pull-up. Right now, I hang there and I go, and that's about how far I go. But what if sometime I fly off a bridge and I hang onto the side of the bridge? I've got to be able to pull myself up off of that bridge and save my. Oh, George says pull-ups are easy. Yeah, easy for you to say. You're a man with upper body strength. I can't
George
do
probably
it.
does it with one arm.
Oh, George is definitely a one-armed pull-up kind of a guy. One-armed push-ups too.
Awesome.
Oh, good. I'm glad you guys stood up and did some stretching.
Good. All right. So as we kind of ease into the second hour, I'm going to take kind of the same concepts of safety, calm, connectedness, efficacy, and hope. So I'm going to pick you up while you're doing this. You got some. See, there's humor. I love it. So in moving ahead, you're going to see these concepts, those five, expressed in a different way. We're going to operationalize them. We're going to talk about specific skills. And this is really an appetizer for face-to-face training that will hopefully, cross our fingers, come to your community in the future. So in revisiting man-made disasters, the signatures, as we discussed, are extremely unique. And I'm always amazed at how the culture that comes around that. And so your culture on the West Coast is around earthquakes and wildfires. I was training in Santa Rosa about a year and a half ago with a large room of mostly mental health, but not all mental health. We're teaching the skills you're about to be introduced to when all their phones went off, and it was the emergency broadcast system, and the whole front of the room had to leave because a wildfire had broken out and was threatening their homes. So on the West Coast is certainly earthquakes, wildfires. When I travel to the Midwest, near my home office in Missouri, when I get up there, it's around tornadoes. So I have to ask, so if I'm on West Coast, I'm keeping my clothes near the bed. So if the case is a quake, I know where they are and I can get out. In the Midwest, I ask where the shelter is for tornadoes, especially this time of year. Usually it's the northeast corner of a building. I chuckle because in New Orleans, I mean, our hurricanes, don't get me wrong, for the entire Gulf Coast, East Coast, they're devastating. But we know they're coming. And so there is some planning that can be done. What saddens me is that social disparity doesn't allow everyone to escape. And so there certainly is a lot to be done around responding to disasters, and not everyone is afforded complete safety, even in the event of, say, a hurricane or flooding. So another conversation for another time. Specific to climate change is acknowledging that climate change impacts physical, mental, and community health. That in the center, in this graphic that is taken from a very, very excellent resource that I'll share with you at the end around changing climate and mental health, that in the middle we acknowledge the vulnerabilities. So there are vulnerable populations. They talk about age and ethnicity, but there are other types of vulnerabilities. So it could come with pre-existing conditions, are not only physical, but maybe mental health. We can uncover quickly economic inequality, so just what I referenced around being able to evacuate, available health care, social cohesion. So these are all things that make up that unique signature when a disaster happens. This idea of available health care, and I'd like to hear if anyone has similar experience or maybe different. The media would like everyone to believe that telemedicine or telehealth now is like lighting up a phone, a video camera, but it's not that simple. Here in Louisiana, I know in other parts of the country, there's a clear economic inequality that equates to disparities in healthcare. Why? Well, not everyone has the money or lives in a place that can afford a smartphone or have Wi-Fi. And so it's created here in rural Louisiana a have and have-nots. And so although insurance companies for us right now are paying for telemedicine, they're not always going to do that. They don't pay for phone calls. There's a few right now that are allowing it, but that's going to go away. We have to do phone calls because people are living so far off the grid that we can't reach them. So this idea of telehealth, again, brings about this idea of vulnerabilities. And so I see some people commenting, many doctors use iPhones and have different platforms and Androids. Exact. So even if you have connectivity, sometimes they don't talk to each other. And so we may work this out, but if you're living here in Louisiana, say up in Tensa Parish, which is very rural, you may not have internet, you may not have Wi-Fi, you may not be able to afford a smartphone. So this is something we have to work on. So these vulnerabilities are important to acknowledge in the face of climate change. And so there are examples, some studies that do look at the relationship between climate change and mental health. We can look to Canada to understand what changes in climate can do to especially hunting and fishing tribal communities. And so lack of ice flow, lack of permafrost can significantly impact the path in which migrating animals take, which in turn change the way to hunt. And I've been on enough calls to recognize that elder wisdom is becoming obsolete when you look at how significant change is happening in communities, that even tribal knowledge passed down by elders doesn't work. And so there are elders that have never seen these types of, say, migratory patterns, for instance. And so addressing those needs is a challenge. So what we learn from these types of studies, that there are certainly strong emotional reactions, which include sadness, anxiety, depression, fear, stress, and frustration. This isn't surprising. And sadly, a way to fill in this empty time when you're not hunting or fishing or foraging or planning for next season, even in fixing up, preparing for hunting season, is there's a lot of empty time. And so increased drug and alcohol use can happen. We saw it actually in South Louisiana after the BP oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was both an economic and an environmental disaster. And we saw significant impact in drug and alcohol use in all communities in South Louisiana because people had a lot of downtime. And it did impact maybe disproportionately the tribal communities in South Louisiana. There's reduced self-efficacy. We've talked about this before. We haven't seen these types of migratory patterns before. And so there's not this toolbox or skill set to work from. So you're losing control over your traditions, which equals loss of identity, loss of self-worth, and finally, again, reduced self-efficacy. There's nothing to draw from. There's no traction to be able to overcome and say that we can overcome these types of things. They're too overwhelming and too different to be able to adapt to. Existing stressors, like we saw, can increase community's inability to not do well in the long term. We saw these just a few moments ago, but I'm going to discuss them in a different way in this last hour. Supporting mental wellness amongst individuals, we want to be able to do these types of things in relation to climate change. So building a belief in resilience is important. Optimism, providing hope. Teaching coping and self-regulation skills, or reminding people. I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge a very humbling moment in my career, which happened after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I was invited by the United Homa Nation to come and speak to the tribe in a community forum. And so I was scheduled to go on second. The first individual professional was an expert he was representing the levee system, which protects large portions of land here in southern Louisiana. And as I was finishing up my spaghetti dinner, someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, "The levee guy isn't coming, you're on next." So here I am, Dr. Walker, having several years of experience in dealing with man-made and natural disasters. I have some interventions in my pocket. I can train them. So I get up in front of the community. There were probably 200 in this hall. In that very moment, I realized that I knew nothing. I knew nothing about being resilient. I was looking at a community that had existed for over 300 years, and that I had not much to teach them that was new. And I expressed that to them, but what I said was that I had the opportunity maybe to work with them to reinforce what they already knew. And so this comes with some skills probably practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years, but maybe practicing them again in new ways. And for me to help them find that sense of community efficacy again would be important through very difficult and uncharted territory. So what I, at the time, was about to embark on was a program, an intervention called Skills for Psychological Recovery. And it's now in its second edition. It was created for long-term recovery based on those 5 elements. We, along with the United Homa Nation, went into a cooperative agreement where we were teaching tribal elders, the council, and other adults in these skills, but we were also invited into the schools. And I'm proud to say that there were actually entire schools that kids learned these skills. We were able to come out of these kind of lessons with maybe reinforced coping skills. If I was in front of you today, I would be able to take 2 full days and teach you these skills and give you a formal certification in it. And I'm hoping that this is enough to pique your interest and to keep in contact with Shasta, myself, and our colleague Angie to sign up for and be certified in this intervention. These SPR skills, again, skills for psychological recovery, support those 5 things of safety, calming, connectedness, efficacy, and hope. And they're divided across these skills, which include problem solving, promoting positive activities, managing reactions, promoting helpful thinking, and finally rebuilding healthy social connections. And I would train you, or will train you, in the ability to go into your communities and teach these things yourself to others. Problem solving. Of all the 5, I believe that problem solving and social connectedness are the most important. And what problem solving does is enhances your mastery in creating things that maybe you've never seen before. It reduces stress. It can increase social interaction if you're brainstorming with other individuals. It can actually reduce depression because you're acting on it. It's my one of my sayings here in my office when I'm working with individuals, that if you want something to be different, you've got to actually do something different. And so positive activities and maybe exercising and doing those things can be helpful. Managing reactions, minimizing arousal and distress is important. And promoting helpful thinking is probably the most difficult. I'll talk a little bit about this idea of negative thinking, and I'm not saying that the world is all unicorns and rainbows. The bad things, excuse me, do happen to good people. But the way that you take things on, we can think about things in new ways and to maybe support our recovery. And of course, long social connections. So informal community care really capitalizes on these types of connections. In the questions we've talked about earlier, planning that you guys have already begun, that we want to be able to maintain as best we can connections with other individuals, whether we're writing a note or find an informal platform. Staying connected is extremely important. Informal community care capitalize on that peer-to-peer, and I want to walk you through some ideas around that. Again, I've talked about self-care. You guys have got self-care. It's finding the time to do it. That's important. So Shasta is going to work on her pull-ups. Where other of us are going to work on, maybe our diet or reserving a happy hour for just Fridays. So these are all ways that we can take care of ourselves. If you look at this, this is from the WHO, the World Health Organization, and it talks about mental health or wellness after disasters. We have to think about mental health and well-being differently. The soapbox that I'm on is around really being preventative. In the end, I don't want people to come to my office if they don't have to. So the pyramid that you see in front of you is layered in such a way that self-care can handle a lot of things. So meditation, this idea of mindfulness, diet, exercise, there's a lot that can be maintained at a lower level in preventative mental health, where we may not need higher levels of care. So I believe that both self-care in this case and informal community care, taking care of each other, can prevent higher levels of care. So primary care services for mental health, what happens in this office. Community mental health services and general psychiatric is even more serious. And then sadly, some people do need long-term care for psychiatric services. So what I want to speak to, and some of you on this call may have been introduced to this program before, was created after the Joplin EF5 tornado. And so for Joplin, it was in May 22nd, May 22nd, 2011, it was a Sunday afternoon, where this EF5 tornado came through town from the west, actually out of Oklahoma and Kansas. And what was happening for that town after that 30 minutes of destruction was not only how buildings being reduced to rubble, it was so strong that it actually took away earth like a bulldozer. 163 people died as a direct result of that tornado. But what came out of it was the realization that people were pulling themselves up by the bootstraps, yes, but not sharing their true experience. So people were communicating, but the answer that people were getting when asked how you're doing was I'm fine or I'm good. we did focus groups for my company, Mercy, but also in the larger community, and realized that these 5 things were very present as concerns. And we think that now, even coming on in like nine years later, that they're still important. So how's your work? How's school? At the time in Joplin, people were underemployed. They weren't working, or overemployed, that they were doing double shifts or having to travel long distances. Love was threatened, relationships in particular. So a lot of people were living with, because of destroyed homes, living with people that they didn't expect to live with. And so tensions were high. Grief was present with 163 dead. Play was hard to come by, so positive activities. There was a lot of guilt around the town being devastated and taking time out to go for a run or to do yoga. There was work to be done and cleanup to be had. Sleep, there it is. Again, sleep is a biological mandate, really, for our existence. Sleep was hard to come by because the storms continued that summer, and it was hard for people to sleep because they were so vigilant around another storm. And then diet, consumption, people eating too much, too little, or drinking too much, or drugs and alcohol to cope. This program, How's Your 5, was developed in Joplin through the hospital system, and I've been the curator, really the manager of this program for the last 9 years, and have actually taught this, rolled it out in communities like the United Home and Nation. What's interesting is that although it was born in a disaster kind of climate, it really rings true on the everyday. And if those of you on this call are tweeters that follow Twitter, How's Your 5 has a daily tweet. And so on Mondays, we talk about work and school. Tuesdays about love and relationships. Wednesdays around positive activities, sleep, and then eating cover Thursday and Friday. And so I'm in charge of that. So I'm the guy behind the curtain. So if any of you want to follow How's Your 5, we kind of support through good articles, good reading, facts, sometimes fun, around these 5 domains. Have actually had outcomes around How's Your 5 out of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We rolled it out there community-wide, and we have some preliminary outcomes that show that How's Your 5 does create greater cohesion in communities. And if you're interested, although the number of people in the study was around 30, if you're interested in more detail around that outcome, I'll be happy to share with you. So these are just some examples of how How's Your 5, or where How's Your 5 has been rolled out. So we have Fort McMurray up in way north in Canada. Around wildfires. It started in Joplin, Missouri, but we were able to launch it with the Home Indians Nation after the environmental disaster of Deepwater Horizon. And there's been adaptations, and so the United Home and Nation took the logo and attached to it the turtle, which I understand, and I'd like to hear from you all. I understand the turtle is a animal that represents wellness and I think wisdom as well. And so they thought it was important to represent it in a culturally appropriate way. And so this is we think, an excellent example of how we adapt to your own cultures. And so in this case, the turtle surrounds How's Your 5. How's Your 5 promotes individuals being connected, because they're asking about How's Your 5 and expecting an answer. So what does it mean? You can't get away with I'm fine or I'm good if How's Your 5 is in your community. They're asking specifically How's Your 5. So you're thinking, how's my sleep? Or how am I get along with other people? So it creates connections, it creates some deeper conversations. It increases awareness around these 5 things. So if you follow us on Twitter, everyone has some idea on best practices or what the challenges are in your community. If I was to come, or when I come, if How's Your 5 is chosen as a rollout in your community, we will actually do a real-time community needs survey for everybody in the room. And we'll take about an hour to break down work, love, play, sleeping, and eating in a way that is meaningful to your community. And you'll actually walk away understanding what your community is concerned about and be able to take that to the street and maybe actually create some action plans. And of course, it does promote conversations around these topics, it helps people become more connected, because by just saying fine or good, it ends the conversation, right? You can go much deeper than that. So these are some pictures from powwow a handful of years ago in 2017. And so the homeless sponsored this down in actually Houma, Louisiana, just outside. And so it was a great weekend. And so you can see the great t-shirt that they were able to develop and able to share it with other visiting tribes during the powwow. And this is one of the winners of the dance contests. And so we thought it was a great opportunity to, again, share what we knew in our evidence-based practice. In this case, How's Your 5, with cultural competency. So it's true cultural competency where we take what we know and apply it to what you know in your community. And so good times, and we hope to be able to visit them again soon when COVID-19 lifts itself from our communities. So again, getting beyond I'm fine is important. So whether you use How's Your 5 or some other type of program, breaking through and really creating a meaningful conversation has always been a challenge. I think a lot of people pass off the opportunity to talk deeper because they think that they've got this, or somehow they're not vulnerable, or maybe they believe that someone else has it worse than them. They can't talk about that their problems are minor compared to other people. And this here is actually at a Fort McMurray. These are school counselors giving feedback. So not if, but when I come to the West Coast or other communities on this call, I firmly invite all of you to think about how How's Your 5 may be used in your community. You can see here that this is in our second hour. We've talked, kind of instructed these individuals. This is a train the trainer program where they actually are given permission to go out and train others. You can see the concerns here in Fort McMurray after their wildfire. And so I don't have individual pictures on this slide deck, but you can see under eat, which is really consumption to the right. It reads, the top one is increased usage of alcohol. They actually vote. And so there's little tiny dots. And there's actually a profile that's created. And so they can actually prioritize these individual concerns. So there's a real thumbprint, a pulse that's taken on the community around work, love, play, sleeping, and eating. Where do we put our focus? Where do you put your focus? I highly recommend. This is found easily online. I can send it to Shasta in a PDF. But the American Psychological Association, along with other highly respected organizations, put together a whole series on mental health and climate change. Pieces and parts include exactly what you've learned here today around interventions, which could include what they call psychological first aid, which is based on the same exact principles. Psychological first aid is for immediate response. It's just that. It's like in the weeks, even hours after a disaster, these are techniques you can use to help people find a sense of stability. Whereas SPR, skills for psychological recovery, is more for the long term. And so I highly recommend having this in your library of resources. What they, in this document, support, again, as mentioned previously, is to be able to expand your infrastructure. And I'm not talking about traditional mental health, whether it's through your health services or other mental health professionals you rely on. I'm talking about caring for yourselves and caring for each other. So much can be done in preventing higher levels of referrals or care that it has to be capitalized upon. So being able to get together, informal mental health means would be important. Disparities, pay attention to populations of concern. So in your own communities, who are you not reaching? And how can you problem solve in ways to reach people in very untraditional mental health ways? So when we get past not being able to get together, how can you create gatherings that support mental health in very, say, untraditional or clinical ways, right? Again, I don't want people to come to my office. I want people to maintain their health and wellness in their own communities. Engage and train community members on how to respond. So this is an example of that. So this program, this project, is a way to increase your knowledge and to be able to ask questions and go out and seek more training on how to respond to your own community's individual needs. So distributing good resources, but also making sure that they're culturally appropriate would be important, and having frequent climate and mental health communication, which is happening again in this project. So these are all things that they highlight in this. So we have about 20 minutes. This is how you can find me. I'll keep this up for just a little bit, but know that if you know Shasta, you can find me. I'm never too far away. And if you have lingering questions, want to know more about through Shasta or contacting me directly, I'd be happy to share what I know and support you in whatever your role is in your community. So I'm going to leave this up for a second and hand it over to not just Shasta, but everybody else on the call. What do you want to talk about? I've thrown a lot at you guys today. I don't know what's on your mind. I'm not a mind reader, and if I was, I would be either extremely rich or maybe even a little bit beside myself. So I'm going to unshare. I think unshare my screen if I can.
Okay. Well, I can change the presenter back to me.
There you go. I think that's been done.
Okay. So
you've got the football again?
I do.
All right. We're a team.
Yeah. So and again, we've got some time left. If anybody has questions or comments, I can even unmute you if you want to actually speak out loud, as opposed to typing into the question box. But I think I'll start us out with a question for all of you, and it's about the How's My Five, and see if that's something you'd be interested in having more training on when we have that time when we can bring Doug out in person to do more training. Because I know I've used it a little bit and I think it's really useful. So if you want to be a part of that, let me know. And you can say that now. Everybody's like, we have lunch in 20 minutes. So, you know, that growling stomach is.
Yeah. Well, I'm into my afternoon, so I get that.
Yeah.
But I've been, I'm proud of How's Your Five because it was created out of a community response. It was created from focus groups and I've been really surprised at how universal the concepts have been. There have been adaptations. You can see what the United Home Nation did with the logo. When we implemented it in their community on a daily basis, it was actually bolted on to their health center. So they have a community health center. I think that's open twice or three times a week. They do acupuncture there. They help people with their diets, nutrition, maintaining proper A1C levels, weight. And so there's always check-ins around How's Your Five as well. And they've created unique kind of, I won't really call them surveys, but for people to kind of take a pulse of their own five when they get together. So it'd be interesting to see how it would be applied in your communities in the future. So, How's Your Five is a training opportunity. The Skills for Psychological Recovery is generally a full 2-day training. And so it's intense, and know this, SPR, Skills for Psychological Recovery, was not designed for mental health professionals. It was designed for paraprofessionals, anyone in the people business are trained in it. So I always tell, as you guys are thinking about more questions or things to discuss, the most efficient teams that I saw were created in Tennessee. I trained there after some flooding, and this organization who got the contract after the federally declared disaster hired as many mental health as general, say, underemployed workers. And there was a plumber, I remember, who was teamed up with a social worker, and we had trained once and then had followed up. But he was absolutely amazing. And he was amazing because he was a problem solver. Now think about what plumbers do, right? So they get this pipe from here to there. And they do that through problem solving, through different connections, taking a different approach, different angles. He was absolutely wonderful. And so that combination of plumber and social worker in this case was an excellent combination. So when I come, know that this opportunity is not just for mental health professionals. It's for everybody. And the best problem solvers oftentimes are not us mental health folks, because we get all caught up into like stuff, right? And so we're looking for people who are practical, who are people persons, who like to sit down and visit. So count yourself in if you're a people person.
I'm not a people person. I don't like people. I like it. I like the individuals that I know, but like humanity as a group, I'm actually very much an introvert. I know most people who know me, who are listening to this, are probably like, right, Shasta, you're the last thing from an introvert, but I am. I need my time away. There's a reason I live by myself. But another question I have for people. Oh, so Lisa says she hates people too. See, Lisa, that's why I love you so much, because we're both not what's the word? Misanthropists.
Right.
Yeah, and Melody says the same thing. Not a people person, but people think I am. But so for my fellow misanthropists out there, this is the work that we have to do. So another question I have is that do we think that the How's Your Five is something that would work in our communities? And it's important to keep in mind the cultures, the different cultures. And so it's not just the individual people's personalities, but it's the overall kind of community personality that you have to consider. And for some people, saying I'm fine is all they're willing to do. Oh, and Cindy has a question. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute Cindy. and that way she can ask her question out loud. Okay, Cindy, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I love all of this, and I would love to do more and have more trainings and go further. However, my issue is my position is 100% grant funded. So with that goes the issue of how do I work this into my grant? Because I have a stickler for a project officer who is everything that I do. If, you know, I mean, I can do this and not report it or not write it down, but you know, I want it to be part of my grant. I want it to be part of my work. So how do I go about doing that? Because, you know, everything that I've been doing, you know, she's going, oh, that doesn't relate, that doesn't relate. So that's my question.
Well, we're getting some responses from your colleagues here. You know, like Lisa says, call it COVID response, team building, call it community outreach. And I was going to say the same, community outreach. And I'm just going to put this out there. Are your project officers' initials PO?
No, actually, they're
Okay.
MA.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll discuss your. I'm assuming this is your GAP project officer.
Yes.
Yeah, Doug may have some more insight on that question as well.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of answered a little bit. So on one level, I offer up my expertise to also write grants. And so a good example of this is in North Carolina. They approached me about a year and a half ago because of disaster response, climate change, and increasing number of hurricanes. And I helped them write in SPR and some of the other evidence-based practices. So we got it in the front door first. And after funding, so I'm scheduled to go and train maybe later this year. Your challenge is that is fitting into something that's already happening. So I like what people said in this call it COVID response, community outreach. I would hope your project officer, your grant officer would have some flexibility to understand that you all are in uncertain, in uncharted territory. The rationale in supporting especially SPR is easy. You know, to put together a couple paragraphs, a couple pages, whatever you need to make a case for is easy. SPR is the recommended program after federal disasters. And so when bad things happen, wildfires, people like me are called in and work alongside like FEMA to train individuals. So it's reached the mark. The question here is around outcomes. I would think that your manager would want to know, okay, so what? You know, what are the outcomes? Now you have to think beyond just people trained. So maybe designing or thinking about what do you want to improve? So just to say you did the training so you can sleep at night isn't enough. To actually say we train this many people is not enough. Can you actually create change in either knowledge, so increase people's knowledge, or the brass ring on this is changing people's behavior? That's harder to do, but if you could somehow align what you've seen or maybe learned about today into the overall grant goals, then you might have a chance at this. So there are a lot of other experts on this. So Lisa's coming in around emergency response. Melody says the same. Or even do a pilot. I think Lisa's also saying, you know, get trained and just do a small group. It can be formal or informal. So what else do you guys have to say?
I suggest that you can piggyback on others' grant efforts. So like what we're doing here in Paula, for years now, I've tried to work things into my grants, not necessarily my Well, actually, no, including my GAP grant, which is, I assume what you're talking about as the one that your project officer is being a stickler. It's if you're enhancing capacity under GAP, and that's capacity to manage crisis, especially environmentally related crisis, then I think that's going to go over fine with your PO. But also, you can put into GAP that you're attending trainings, and if we put on this training in person, or like even now today, what we're doing, you should be able to cover that under staff time under that particular grant. So let others, let some of us who have been doing this for a long time or have a big staff that's not entirely grant funded, take on some of that role and invite you to be a part of it. Oh, emergency response can only be for EPCRA? Okay, yeah, we need to have, well, let's talk about this offline and figure out how to get your project officer on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea here is I like to, to train emergency response is a very crowded space. What's not talked about is long-term. And so people, and those of you on the call maybe who've gone through a natural disaster can realize, I always talk it, 1 year and 1 day. What happens on that 366th day is that the funding goes away and so do the TV cameras. And nobody comes back to cover or understand your recovery until 5 years later at an anniversary. And then there's a big kumbaya and there's memorials and or whatever. There's newspaper articles, but you're left to your own. And so that's why SPR is designed for the long-term recovery, which is completely in line with what's going to have to happen with climate change in responding to it. It's long-term. It's not a one-off, responding to, hurricane, or what we have, Cristobal, it was our tropical storm, or the next named wildfire. So there's a way to tweak this in true honesty and in being forthcoming and transparent around, long-term maintenance of your community.
Okay, so I'm seeing a few other responses that relate to Cindy's difficulties, so we can again share that. But that's another thing to consider when I said maybe we need to develop some sort of a virtual support group. I know we already have email that we do with one another through our various groups that we belong to, but that can be a little bit distracting when there's a bunch of reply all responses to one individual's question. So I really do think we should develop something where people can just go on as needed to see what people are talking about. So I'll think about doing that. And that way we can ask those sorts of questions. Because like Lisa said, John Parada said something out about emergency response. So we need to be able to have somebody say, hey, where's that thing that John sent out, so that I can take a look at it and use it. All right, anybody else want to be unmuted or speak up? Still haven't heard anything from Michelle at Indian Health, and I know, Michelle, I called you out earlier. Maybe you had stepped away from your desk, and I'm really curious to know how things are going over there with the COVID response. And now she's probably going to say, no, I'm going to ignore you, Shasta, because that's totally not right for you to spotlight me like that. This is when I go back to my professor mode and I, start pointing people out. Oh yeah, she says hi. Yes. Michelle, can I unmute you and you can just let us know if any of this resonates with what you're doing at Indian Health? Things are running smoothly. Okay, good. Good. I'm glad to hear that. But I think this How's Your Five, I wouldn't be surprised if your doctors are not already doing something similar to that to find out how people are. How are they sleeping? How are they eating? I always focus on the eating personally. For you guys, last Wednesday, I brought in donuts for my staff. I brought in Peterson's Donuts. If you're a local, you know Peterson's Donuts in Escondido. They have donuts that are like the size of hubcaps. You guys, I ate three in one day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Peterson's Donuts. So not good. How was my eating of the 5 that day? Not so great. Oh, and now I'm getting encouragement from you guys. Oh, those are the best. Right on. No, you're supposed to say, Shasta, have a donut for breakfast and then have a salad for lunch. A salad donut. Oh, and Michelle says they're having a public health cooking demo today. Oh, that's great. Yeah, food for me. I can sleep. I am an Olympic gold medal sleeper. I have no problem with sleeping, but food, it's my kryptonite. The snacks, yeah, not great. Oh, and then Melody actually disagrees that things are not going smooth, that great at the clinic in Rincon, but maybe on the staff side, it seems like things are running smoothly. But yeah, great recipes on the website. Thank you, Michelle. We can share those. And speaking of sharing, I will also be sending out the presentation, the slides, so you can review those at your leisure. And we have been recording this, so the recording will also be available for anybody who wants to review it or for others who were not able to make today's webinar. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised to volunteer to be unmuted. Maybe with a little 5-minute buffer. Yeah, we've got a little 5-minute buffer, so maybe we can just use that as a little bit of more relaxation and stretching time, more toe touching time.
Yeah, I believe in the gift of time itself. And so if no one has any other questions, know that Shasta and I are never far away, and don't be a stranger. I actually tell people I only get upset if people don't contact me. So if I meet up with you in the future and say, Doug, I was going to email you, but then I get angry. All right. So don't be a stranger. Keep the questions coming. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And have a lovely day. And I will speak with you all hopefully soon. And thank you so much, Doug, for all the great information today.
Thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.